Hola amigos, buen dia. Hello everybody. As you know, in these series of lessons, we have been bringing to you anecdotic as well as informative episodes on Latin American culture, Latin American history through the figure of Latin American women. And today, we are going to bring you the story of some valiant women. These are women who have fought against the dictatorships in Latin America. We are going to tell you today the story of Las Hermanas Mirabal, or the brave Mirabal sisters from the Dominican Republic. You know where the Dominican Republic is, no? In the Caribbean. And we are also going to bring you the inspiring story of the Madres y Abuelas de la Plaza de Mayo, or the mothers and grandmothers of the May Plaza from Argentina. Now, these women fought bravely against military dictatorships in their respective countries in the 20th century, and they showed that women were a powerful voice against injustice. They are today respected and recognized world over for their contribution towards building a more just and humane society. You would know that most countries in Latin America were freed from Spanish colonial rule in the early 19th century, between 1810 1820s. And after their independence, in the entire 19th century, they were ruled by a series of caudillos, or local strongmen, all through the 1800s. In the 20th century too, many countries in Latin America suffered under dictatorships and military rule till until the 1980s, when finally these dictators were brought down and democracies restored as we find today in the continent. So let us first see the inspiring story of the Mirabal sisters, Las Hermanas Mirabal, Patria Mirabal, Minerva Mirabal, and Maria Teresa Mirabal from the Dominican Republic, who fought against the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo. Who was Rafael Trujillo? He was one of Latin America's cruelest dictators, Rafael Leonidas Trujillo. He was a career officer in the army of the Dominican Republic, and he assumed power fraudulently in an election, and he remained in power until his assassination in 1961. Nearly 30 odd years of dictatorial rule. And during his regime, opponents of the regime were mysteriously killed, disappeared, and Trujillo is well known for his policy of targeting on racial basis. He's known for his racial discrimination. He used to target mostly the black inhabitants, particularly of his neighboring country, Haiti, and of course, many dark-skinned, dark-colored Dominican citizens also. So, who were these sisters? Who were the Hermanas Mirabal? They are also known as Las Mirabal, and they were three sisters who fervently opposed the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo, and for that reason, they were arrested, they were raped, tortured on several occasions. But in spite of these harassments, they continued their fight until the day of their death. After several imprisonments, Trujillo decided to eliminate the sisters. And on November 25, 1960, the bodies of the Mirabal sisters were found crushed inside a jeep sunk in a ravine in Salcedo, which is a northeastern district in Dominican Republic. The three women had been murdered by a death squad sent by the dictator himself. These men of the head of the state actually beat them to death and put their bodies into the vehicle to make it look like an accident, but there was never any doubt that it was a state crime. This crime shook the conscience of the nation. Trujillo believed that he had By eliminating the sisters, he had eliminated the big problem. But the murder of the Mirabal sisters, who were known as Las Mariposas, it was their code name, Las Mariposas, or the butterflies. In fact, it became one of the triggers causing the fall of the dictator. The Dominican people became more and more convinced of the ideals that the Mirabal sisters stood for, and more inclined to support them. And this reaction helped to raise awareness in the public and finally culminated in the assassination of the dictator on May 30, 1961. It might be interesting for you to know that the whole world commemorates November 25 as the International Day of Non-Violence Against Women in memory of the three sisters, Patria, Minerva, and Maria Teresa Mirabal. At the first Latin American and Caribbean Women's Meet, which was held in Bogota in Colombia in July 1981, it was proposed to make November 25 a day of reflection and denunciation against the different forms of violence suffered by women. Different women's movement of Latin America chose this date in honor of the three young Dominican girls who had laid down their lives. And some years later, in 1999, the United Nations joined the day of protest and declared November 25 as the International Day of Non-Violence Against Women. The recognition of this date in memory of the feminicide of the Mirabal sisters aims to pay homage to the victims as well as to reflect on the different forms of violence against women, which is not only physical, even if this is the most visible kind of violence that women face, but it is also psychological, sexual, and economic. The house of the Mirabal sisters in Salcedo has become a museum, the Museum of the Mirabal sisters. It's a historical cultural legacy that the country is proud of. The Mirabal sisters lived in this house, in this humble house with their mother, Doña Cheche. And we can see now when we go to the museum, several personal objects belonging to the sisters, which have now become invaluable pieces because they describe the life of these valiant Dominican women. The house is, of course, a traditional wooden house. It is conserved in the original state, reflecting the 20th century style of making houses. And at the back of the house, there is a garden where the three sisters are buried, Patria, Minerva, and Maria Teresa, who would become the heroines of the overthrow of the last dictator of Dominican Republic, and who are today known by the beautiful name of Las Mariposas, or the butterflies. Their life has been immortalized in several novels. In fact, Latin American literature has a tradition of the literature of dictators. For example, the Nobel Prize winning novelist Miguel Ángel Asturias from Guatemala has written this novel called El Señor Presidente, the Señor President or Mr. President. The title is actually of the novel is The President. And Gabriel Garcia Marquez, another Nobel Prize winner from Colombia, he has got a novel called El Otoño del Patriarca, or the Autumn of the Patriarch. Alejo Carpentier from Cuba has got a novel on the Haitian dictator. It's called El Reino de este Mundo, the Kingdom of this World. And Augusto Roa Bastos has got a novel called Yo el Supremo. The brutality of the final days of Trujillo, the cruel dictator who ordered the killing of the Mirabal sisters, has been dramatized in the novel La Fiesta del Chivo, Feast of the Goat, of the Nobel Prize winning novelist from Peru, Mario Vargas Llosa. The lives of these courageous women, the Mirabal sister who inspired the novel In the Time of the Butterflies by Julia Alvarez. Julia Alvarez is a US-based Latino writer. She's a Dominican writer. And this book by Julia Alvarez, this novel of Julia Alvarez, was adapted for cinema. The film is called In the Time of the Butterflies, and it's also played by Salma Hayek, the Mexican actress, along with Edward James Olmos, Demian Bichir, another very well-known Mexican actor, Mia Maestro, and the Dominican actor Anthony Alvarez. After seeing this valiant story of the Mirabal sisters, we will now move on to the story of the mothers and grandmothers of the May Plaza from Argentina. You would know that in 1976, the military staged a coup in Argentina, and with that began the bloodiest regime the country had ever known. There had been several coups in Argentina in the 20th century, but in this 1976 coup, the military suspended the constitution and replaced it with El Proceso. What was the El Proceso? It was a statute for the process of national reorganization. This process of national reorganization concentrated all judicial, executive and legislative powers in the hands of the dictator. Jorge Rafael Videla, one of the leaders of the military coup, who appointed himself president and waged what is known as La Guerra Sucia, or the Dirty War, from 1976 to 1983, during which the military government abducted, tortured and killed anyone who they thought was a dissenter. And many of these dissenters were young people, students and other youth trying to express their dissatisfaction with the regime. The kidnapped people were referred to as los desaparecidos, or the disappeared ones. So a group of mothers began to complain and demand answers from the authorities about the illegal detention of their children who had been captured by the military or the police. They never knew where these people had been taken. They didn't know whether they were in the prisons. So they began meeting in the Plaza de Mayo, which is the May Plaza, every Thursday. So they used to meet in front of the Casa Rosada. Casa Rosada, or the Pink Palace, is the presidential palace, the seat of the government. So every Thursday they began their march around the plaza, that is the square. It is a march which was replicated throughout the country, and it continues until today in Buenos Aires, the capital. And it will continue, they say, until the fate of the thousands of disappeared is known. So the first weekly protest was held on April 30, 1976. The woman who is the president of the Association of the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo, Senora Ebe de Bonafini, she's herself the mother of 2 disappeared children. She has narrated the historical facts about those days. She said that we went for the first time on April 30, 1976. She says she remembers it was a Saturday, and the idea was to just submit a letter to the government so that they would tell us what had happened to our children. This day was chosen finally until today. It carries on till today, as I told you, to carry out the marches around the Pyramid of May. Now, what is the Pyramid of May? It is a historical monument in the May Plaza that reminds the Argentinians of 25th of May 1810, the day of their independence from Spanish colonial rule, which was achieved on 9th July 1816. Now, these women were called the mad women of May Plaza, las locas de la Plaza de Mayo. But they had found a way to channel their despair and frustration into action. In their weekly demonstrations every Thursday, they carried pictures of their missing children. Later, they started wearing white scarves to symbolize the white dove of peace. And on the scarves, they had embroidered the names of their loved ones, of their children who were missing. So this non-violent expression of truth by the mothers eventually drew international attention, and human rights groups started arriving from world over. They helped them open an office, they helped them publish a newspaper, and they helped them to go places and make speeches. And although the police continued to harass the mothers, it became more difficult for the government to ignore the moral presence of these mothers who were just standing there as witnesses to the illegal and brutal acts of the regime. As mothers, they presented a powerful moral symbol which over time transformed them from just mothers into women seeking to protect their children, and women wishing to transform the state so that it reflected maternal values. With the return of the civilian government in 1983, when the dictatorship finished in Argentina, the mothers have resisted the decision to pardon the dirty war officials, and their struggles continue. And we will continue to see them struggle for as long as they don't know the fate of the disappeared one. And some of the mothers were actually searching for 2 generations of disappeared, their children and their grandchildren. So soon after the military regime unleashed repression, the relatives of the disappeared discovered another terrifying fact: the disappearance of the babies born during captivity to pregnant mothers. And therefore, on 22nd October 1977, 12 of the mothers who were a part of the Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, they decided to form an association, and they began their struggle to locate the whereabouts of their grandchildren. They named themselves the Association of the Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo. At first, the grandmothers did a detective job, and they did it alone. They communicated in code, they wrote complaints, and they processed data to know where their children and grandchildren were. The grandmothers of the May Plaza have been active ever since, with the main objective of locating and finding the thousands of babies born in captivity to mothers who were illegally detained during the military dictatorship and restore their identity. These babies are known to have been given to military or police families, and many still remain in the families of those who have, actually appropriated them. So the abuelas or the grandmothers committed themselves to finding their missing relatives and return the kidnapped or captive children to their legitimate families. And they have managed to restore their identity to many grandchildren, and they have in fact been able to manage to bring those responsible for these crimes to trial. When it was very difficult to work within the country, the grandmothers actually, won the support of important world organizations and the attention of the international press also. Today, the House of the Grandmothers in Buenos Aires is a familiar place where professionals and young volunteers congregate all the time, and the grandmothers themselves have been nominated several times for the Nobel Peace Prize. Their work has been very difficult. Until 1983, to know the identity of a child, the blood of his parents had to be analyzed. But thanks to the grandmothers, the science has discovered that blood of the grandparents was enough. The so-called indicio de abuelidad or the grandparental index was then used, and 99.9% of its certainty is legal proof of biological filiation. One of the founders of the abuelas, Estela de Carlota, found her grandson in 2014 after 35 years of painstaking search. Referring to her emotions, Estela de Carlota said certain sentences which perhaps will remain unforgettable throughout history. For example, she said, "Hay que seguir buscando a los que faltan porque otras abuelas tienen que sentir lo que siento yo." That is, we must continue to look for those who are missing because other grandmothers must have a chance to feel what I have felt. Or for example, she says, "Gracias a Dios, gracias a la vida, porque lo que yo quería era no morir sin abrazarlo." Meaning, thank God, thanks to life, because what I wanted was not to die without embracing him. She has also said on one occasion, for example, that esto es un triunfo de los argentinos. Las abuelas seguimos con paz y amor buscando. No se desanimen, el día del encuentro llega. Meaning, this is a triumph of the entire Argentine people. The grandmothers continue seeking with peace and love. Do not be discouraged. The day of meeting comes. I hope you have found the story of the Mirabal sisters and the mothers and grandmothers of the May Plaza from Argentina interesting, inspiring, and I hope it will encourage you to look more into this dark chapter of Latin American history. Thank you.